This is an instructional video on converting fractions to decimals. I would recommend that you take notes and keep track of these examples, as they will come in as good references later when you're working problems. So, fraction and decimal representations. We know that values can be represented in several ways. For example, a fraction can also be represented as a decimal or vice versa. If a fraction converts into a decimal that eventually stops, we call it a terminating decimal. Otherwise, if a fraction converts into a decimal with a repeating block or a repeating number or set of values, we call it a repeating decimal. As we start to work these problems, we do need to talk about what a decimal or a fraction looks like. So you have your numerator on the top of the fraction bar and your denominator on the bottom. And when you convert a fraction to a decimal, you're going to take the denominator and divide it into the numerator. So for example, if I have the fraction 1/4, we're going to take that denominator of 4 and divide it into that 1. And we know that 4 is not going to divide into 1, so we do have to add a decimal and a 0. When I add that decimal and a 0, I go ahead and bring that decimal point up so I don't forget it. And then you just do your division. You're dividing 4 into 10 at this point. How many times does 4 go into 10? It'll go in there 2 times. 4 times 2 is 8. You'll subtract. You did not get your problem to come out evenly at this point, so we need to add another 0 and bring it down. At this point, you are dividing 4 into 20. How many times will 4 go into 20? It goes 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. The other thing you have to really watch is your place value. When I divided 4 into 10, my number that I multiplied with, I did 4 times 2, I had to make sure I lined it up over the last digit of the 10. When I figured out how many times 4 would go into 20, which was 5, I had to line up the 5 with the last digit in that 20. So just pay attention to that when you're doing these problems. So let's work some examples. We're going to practice converting the following fraction into decimals, and then we're going to state what type of decimal it is. So this is one that you are expected to memorize, but we're going to work it out. So we would take 8 and divide it into 3. 8's not going to divide evenly into 3, so we have to add a decimal and a 0. Then you ask yourself, 8 goes into 30 3 times. 3 times 8 is 24. We subtract. That leaves us with 6. Didn't come out even, so we need to add a 0 and bring it down. 8 goes into 60 7 times. 8 times 7 is 56. Subtract, you are left with 4. Again, it did not come out even, so we add a 0 and bring it down. 8 goes into 40 5 times. So my decimal answer is 0.375, which makes this a terminating decimal. Let's convert this fraction to a decimal and then figure out what type of decimal we have. So we're going to start out by figuring out how many times will 16 go into 1. Well, 16 is not going to divide into 1, so we have to add a decimal and a 0. And then we look at our problem. 16 is also not going to go into 10. So we have to put a 0 on top. 0 times 16 is 0. Subtract, that leaves me with my 10. Add a 0 and bring it down. Now you're asking yourself, how many times will 16 go into 100? And a lot of times we have a hard time figuring this out. You're thinking about how many times 1 goes into 10. But you got to pay attention to the fact that that second digit is a large number. It's greater than 5. So you can't just say, oh, I'm going to pick 9. That's not going to work. So if I were to guess at, let's say 5, 6 times 5 is 30, carry the 3. 5 times 1 is 5 plus 3 would be 8. So that would give me 80. So then you could guess and check to see if you could find another number that might work that would be better. And so we're going to try 6 because we're pretty close here. 6 times 6 is 36. We're going to carry that 3. 6 times 1 is 6 plus 3 would be 9. So that gives me 96. Subtract, and that leaves me with 4. So we add a 0, bring it down. 16 goes into 40. So if I thought about doing 3 is going to be too big because 3 times 6 is going to give me 18. So that would give me 48. So we're going to back it up to 2. 2 times 6 is 12. We carry that 1. 2 times 1 is 2 plus 1 would be 3. And I know a lot of times we stop on that third decimal place, but because this particular fraction started with a 0 in the beginning, we may want to go ahead and add another 0 and test it, because this one actually is going to terminate. 16 goes into 80 5 times, because see, we just did that one a minute ago. So my answer is 0.0625. It is a terminating decimal. Okay. Let's try this problem. We're going to convert 5/6 to a decimal by dividing 6 into the 5. 6 is not going to go evenly into 5, so we need to add a decimal and a 0. Go ahead and bring that decimal up. 6 goes into 50 8 times. 6 times 8 is 48. Again, watch your place value. 50 minus 48 would be 2. So add that 0 and bring it down. 6 goes into 20 3 times. 3 times 6 is 18. Subtract, and you can say, oh, I have a 2 again. There's no way to break that pattern. If I were to add that 0 and try again, I'm still going to get 3. So I cannot break the pattern. So my answer would be 0.83 with a line over the 3, because only the 3 is repeating. So this is a repeating decimal. You do not need to write that 3 down more than one time. You just write the 3 down one time that repeated and put a line over it to show that it is a repeating decimal. 4/9, changing it to a decimal, we would take 9 and divide it into 4. We do need to add a decimal of 0 because 9 will not go into 4 evenly. So 9 into 40, 9 will go into 40 4 times. 4 times 9 is 36. That didn't come out even, so we need to subtract here at 4. Add a 0 and keep going. 9 goes into 40 again 4 times. 4 times 9 is 36, and we see our pattern. Again, there's no way to break that pattern, so this is a repeating decimal of 0.4 repeating. Convert 13/4 to a decimal and determine if it is a terminating or repeating decimal. So we would start by dividing the denominator of 4 into the numerator of 13. Now on this one, 4 will go into 13 3 times. 3 times 4 is 12. Subtract, and I'm left with 1. It did not come out even, so I do need to add a decimal and a 0. Go ahead and bring that decimal up. Bring your 0 down. 4 goes into 10 2 times. 2 times 4 is 8. Subtract, I'm left with 2. Again, it didn't come out even, so add another 0. Bring it down. 4 goes into 20 5 times. And so this one is a terminating decimal because it stops. We're going to convert 7/9 into a decimal. So we're going to start by dividing 9 into 7. 9 is not going to divide evenly into 7, so we add a decimal and a 0. 9 goes into 70 7 times. 7 times 9 is 63. And we're going to subtract. 70 minus 63 is going to be 7, so I didn't get it to come out even. Add a 0 and bring it down. 9 goes into 70. 7 times. 7 times 9 is 63. And you see the pattern. So my answer is 0.7 with a repeat bar over the top because this is a repeating decimal. Final problem, changing 9/5 to a decimal. So we would start by dividing 5 into that numerator of 9. 5 is going to divide into 9 one time. 1 times 5 is 5. Subtract 9 minus 5 would be 4. So I do need to add a decimal and a 0 since it didn't come out even. Don't forget to take your 0 up. Take your decimal up, bring your 0 down. And then 5 goes into 40. 8 times. 5 times 8 is 40. So this one is a terminating decimal. Of 1.8. Hopefully this has given you several examples of how to change fractions to decimals and also how to determine if it's a terminating or a repeating decimal.